This boy's name is Rintaro. He is currently a student at Chidori Public High School, and this school is infamous for being called a bottom feeder school. In contrast to Chidori Public High School, there is Kikyo Private Academy, located right next to it. It is known as a prestigious school for female students. Kikyo Private Academy has always held a deep grudge against Chidori Public High School, because the girls believe that Chidori Public High School is full of low-level students, a school at the very bottom of society, and that they're nothing but a bunch of idiots. Kikyo Private Academy even prevented its students from looking toward Chidori by placing a curtain right between the two schools. Therefore, the girls openly despised them, so someone like Rintaro could never reach them behind that huge curtain, because Rintaro thought Thatha would never have anything to do with them anyway. As for Rintaro's friends, they were being approached by a group of guys. It turned out that those people were looking for Rintaro, because he had gotten into a fight with some of their underlings a few days earlier. Unexpectedly, right after they said that, Rintaro appeared from behind them at that exact moment, and with Rintaro's frightening expression, those guys quickly ran away. Although Rintaro hadn't done anything to them yet, it turned out that the reason lay in his naturally frightening face. Just by looking at Rintaro, everyone would instantly become extremely anxious. However, Rintaro was actually a very kind person. He truly had a gentle heart and a good nature. But Rintaro was always misunderstood because of his rough and intimidating appearance. As usual, Rintaro stayed home to help his family. His mother was the owner of a pastry shop. Unexpectedly, today she asked Rintaro to watch over the shop, although Rintaro was afraid that his scary face might scare away customers. There happened to be only one customer left in the store, so Rintaro's mother, Kyoko, thought everything would be fine. Then Rintaro began working diligently. Suddenly, he noticed a red umbrella. That reminded him that there was still one customer in the shop. Out of curiosity, he went to check who it was. But the moment the girl saw Rintaro's face, she looked terrified and immediately ran away, leaving Rintaro standing there, completely confused. He thought that he must have scared her off. It turned out that the girl's name was Wagori. She was actually a regular customer of the pastry shop, so that's why Kyoko knew her very well. Afterwards, Rintaro told his mother about what had just happened. He felt terribly guilty, because Wagori had run away the moment she saw him. However, Kyoko believed that Wagori wasn't that kind of person. She even comforted Rintaro, telling him not to blame himself so much, because that wasn't a good habit to have. It turned out that Kyoko was very confident in the taste of her shop's pastries. She wasn't afraid that Wagori would stop coming, since Kyoko planned to use the pastries to lure her back. The next day, Rintaro was still at school, trying to find a way to meet Wagori, because all he wanted was to simply apologize to her. However, things turned out to be harder than Rintaro imagined. Unexpectedly, just one day later, Wagori came back again, so Kyoko quickly ran to tell Rintaro the news. What surprised him even more was that Wagori wanted to meet him specifically. So the two of them finally met again. This time, Wagori was the one who apologized first, because she had suddenly run away the day before. Wagori even brought one of Rintaro's pastries as an apology. But he didn't plan to eat it, since Rintaro wanted to give it back to Wagori instead, and she couldn't resist the tempting aroma of the pastry. So Wagori ended up eating it with great delight, even though she had a petite figure. But Wagori could eat a lot of pastries in one sitting. After that, she even introduced herself. Wagori also wanted to get to know Rintaro better, which completely surprised him. It turned out that Wagori had seen him working there before. So yesterday wasn't actually the first time they had met. At that moment, Rintaro suddenly raised his voice, because he realized something. Wagori hadn't run away before because she was afraid of him, but for a completely different reason. However, Rintaro kept staring at Wagori, which made her a little nervous. Normally, other people would have been scared, but Wagori's reaction was completely different. That only made Rintaro even more confused. However, it was starting to get dark, so Wagori had to go home. But before she left, Wagori made one thing very clear. She said she had never found Rintaro scary at all. However, their conversation was secretly being watched by two strangers. As for Rintaro, when he returned home, he suddenly sat down on the floor in shock. because he was still overwhelmed by what had just happened. After all, Rintaro had always been looked down on by others. And Wagori was the first person who ever said something good about him. But at that moment, Kyoko suddenly appeared. It turned out she had discovered that Wagori had forgotten her cake earlier. So Rintaro immediately ran off to deliver it to Wagori in time. Right then, he came across two bad guys. These two were the same people who had been following them earlier. And they were doing something unpleasant to a young girl. Unexpectedly, that girl was Wagori, because earlier, they had noticed that she seemed close to Rintaro. So the two men had come to approach Wagori. But before she was truly in danger, Rintaro appeared just in time. Fortunately, they ran away as soon as they saw Rintaro's face. However, since Rintaro had taken a blow during the attack, he was now injured. Because of that, Wagori was extremely worried. She was afraid she might cause trouble for Rintaro. But afterward, Wagori also thanked Rintaro for his brave actions earlier. Unexpectedly, this left Rintaro completely stunned, because he had long been used to being treated poorly by others. Yet now, there was someone who changed the way he thought. Through her actions and the way she treated him. That person was none other than Wagori. After that, Rintaro took her home safely. And when Rintaro was back at school, at that moment, the only thing on his mind was Wagori. Because Rintaro truly wanted to see Wagori one more time. Suddenly, Rintaro caught sight of something. It was rare for Kikyo Private Academy to open their curtains. So Rintaro stared intently in that direction. Unexpectedly, the person he saw was none other than Wagori. This made Rintaro freeze on the spot. He simply couldn't believe such a coincidence. That something like this could actually happen to someone like him. A moment later, Rintaro's friend Usami started complaining to him. Usami was frustrated because the girls from Kikyo always looked at him with disdainful eyes. Even though he had already gotten used to it, things kept happening the same way, to the point where Usami couldn't stand it anymore. However, his abilities were limited, so Usami had no choice but to stay at Chidori Academy. It turned out that Usami wasn't the only one facing this issue. Both Saku and Ayato were going through the same thing. Suddenly, Saku noticed the wound on Rintaro's forehead. He even pulled the curtain closed, since it was rare for anyone to see Rintaro act like that. However, Rintaro didn't know how to explain it to his friends, so he decided to open the curtain again. Even though class was still in session, he couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. Just a moment ago, Wagori looked very surprised. Meanwhile, Rintaro had pulled the curtain without thinking. Now, he was starting to regret it, because of how rude his action had been earlier. When school was finally over, Ayato invited Rintaro to hang out with their friends. Since Rintaro didn't have anything to do today, he accepted Ayato's invitation. Unexpectedly, just as they stepped out of the school gate, a large crowd had gathered nearby. It turned out that a girl from Kikyo Academy was waiting for someone there. And surprisingly, that person was none other than Wagori. Rintaro was completely shocked to see her there, because he had no idea why Wagori had come. Then Ayato rushed over to question her, but Wagori simply said that she was waiting for a friend. However, Ayato didn't stop there. Fortunately, Wagori's friends showed up, allowing her to safely return to her school. Perhaps Ayato had grown too sensitive about those Kikyo girls, so he decided not to care about them anymore. Meanwhile, Rintaro couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. His strange expression caught his friends' attention, since they had never seen that look on his face before. After that, they all headed to a place to hang out. Although Rintaro's friends were enthusiastically joining the fun, Rintaro himself stayed unusually quiet. Even his friends could tell right away that something must be bothering him. However, he refused to share anything with them. A while later, Rintaro returned to the bakery. Unexpectedly, Wagori was waiting for him there. It turned out that she had come to apologize to him, because she had caused trouble that morning. Wagori hadn't realized how serious things were between Chidori Public High School and Kikyo Private Academy. However, that didn't really bother Rintaro at all, so he told Wagori not to worry about it anymore. At that moment, Rintaro's mother appeared. She was upset because Rintaro had come home unusually late today, and Wagori had been waiting there for a long time. Perhaps because she was too hungry. Her stomach suddenly growled loudly. making both Rintaro and his mother burst into laughter. Seeing that, Rintaro invited Wagori to have some cake with him. To his surprise, Wagori looked incredibly happy while eating. In fact, just watching her eat was enough for Rintaro. Afterwards, he curiously asked why Wagori had been standing at the school gate that morning. Unexpectedly, her reason was Rintaro himself. Because Wagori had wanted to see him. This made Rintaro feel completely flustered. He didn't know what to say next to Wagori. Perhaps this was the awkward feeling of a boy. Something Rintaro had never experienced before. After that, Wagori suddenly had something urgent to do. So she had to go home right away. Meanwhile, Rintaro was still floating in a daze. His mother could tell that something was off about him. So Rintaro ended up sharing everything with her. Unexpectedly, Kyoko gave him a hard smack on the head. Because of how foolish Rintaro had been about the whole thing. However, Rintaro still couldn't understand why Wagori always took the initiative to get close to him, even though she was a student at Kikyo Private Academy. Kyoko, on the other hand, knew very well that Rintaro had always been insecure about his appearance. As for Wagori, her attitude never changed, even after she found out that Rintaro studied at Chidori Public High School. Unexpectedly, Rintaro suddenly slapped himself in the face, because he thought he was terrible for having such negative thoughts about Wagori. Of course, the real problem lay within Rintaro himself. So the next morning, he waited for Wagori at the school gate. It turned out that Rintaro was waiting there to apologize to her for his unpleasant behavior over the past few days. Part of it came from his own insecurity. But after reflecting on it, Rintaro finally realized his mistake. As for Wagori, she seemed a little embarrassed, because this was the first time Rintaro had ever been honest with her. Through this incident, the two of them made new progress in their relationship, and Rintaro truly wanted to learn more about Wagori. The world Rintaro once thought had nothing to do with him, now felt as if it was slowly moving closer to him. Several days later at school, Usami was extremely excited, because the upcoming sports festival was about to take place. Usami was really looking forward to this event, and he was confident that he could win. However, the teacher suddenly announced that both Usami and Rintaro would not be allowed to participate. It turned out the reason was because both of them had to take their midterm exams. And those exams would definitely be much tougher than the sports festival. So the teacher wanted them to focus on studying instead. If Usami wanted to take part in the festival, he first had to pass that difficult exam. However, for Usami, that was nearly impossible, since he couldn't even concentrate for 10 minutes. But because he really wanted the chance to compete and win, Usami decided he would study on his own no matter what. Meanwhile, Rintaro received a message from his mother. It turned out she told him to invite Wagori to the bakery because there was a discount today. And in fact, Kyoko also wanted to see her again. Recently, Wagori hadn't stopped by the bakery at all. However, Rintaro really didn't know how he could text Wagori. In the end, Rintaro finally gathered the courage to send her an invitation. But Wagori declined, because she was very busy this month. That made Rintaro feel a bit disappointed. Later on, Usami invited him to the library to study together. But it turned out that was extremely difficult for the two of them. Since neither of them could stay focused on studying, the only solution was to ask Saku for help. So Usami hurried off to find Saku for rescue. Meanwhile, Rintaro gave up his seat to two girls, because he noticed they were struggling to find a place to sit. When Rintaro was about to leave, he suddenly saw Wagori there as well. It turned out that Wagori was busy because it was exam preparation season. So she was diligently studying too. Unexpectedly, Wagori always ranked first in her class, and even her classmates admired her intelligence. After that, Rintaro went to find a cool spot to work on his exercises. However, he immediately lay down on the stone bench out of laziness. Unexpectedly, Wagori appeared right above him at that exact moment, which completely surprised Rintaro. It turned out that Wagori had seen someone who looked like him earlier. So out of curiosity, she followed and ended up here. Unexpectedly, that person really was Rintaro. After that, Wagori decided to stay with him. At that moment, Wagori shared that next month, she promised Rintaro she would visit the bakery. Because right now, Wagori needed to save money from her part-time job. This completely surprised Rintaro, since he never expected a young lady like Wagori to have to work part-time. But it turned out that everything was not as Rintaro had imagined. Wagori was attending Kikyo Private Academy thanks to a scholarship. Therefore, she couldn't afford to let her grades drop. That's why Wagori always stayed at the top of her class. Because she understood that, coming from an ordinary family, she had to work harder than anyone else. At that very moment, Rintaro suddenly asked Wagori for a favor. He wanted her to be his tutor. Because Rintaro needed to pass an important upcoming exam. This time, he was truly determined, since he didn't want to give up ever again. To his surprise, Wagori immediately agreed, even though Rintaro thought she wouldn't have the time. That made Rintaro a little surprised. While the two of them were talking, a strange girl suddenly appeared. It turned out her name was Subaru, and she was also Wagori's classmate. And right after Subaru learned about Rintaro's situation, then she immediately showed an unpleasant attitude. Because Rintaro was simply a student from Chidori Public High School. Coincidentally, Rintaro's group of friends happened to pass by. They saw each other and started walking toward Rintaro. However, this only made Subaru even more uncomfortable. So she enthusiastically kept her distance from them. At that moment, Usami walked closer to Wagori. Because he felt that this girl looked very familiar. But Usami couldn't quite remember where he had seen her before. However, he slowly looked straight at Wagori, which made her seem rather frightened. Therefore, Subaru quickly pulled Wagori away from there. But Usami hurriedly apologized to the two girls for his earlier impolite behavior. Perhaps it was because Usami was feeling a bit unsettled at that time. However, Subaru quickly dragged Wagori away. Afterwards, the two of them returned to the library. At that moment, Subaru was curious about Rintaro, the boy who had just talked to Wagori earlier. Unexpectedly, Wagori had a very good impression of Rintaro, and she thought that Rintaro was truly kind-hearted. However, Subaru still couldn't accept this. As for Rintaro, he was struggling with the lessons that had been taught earlier. Even though Rintaro tried his best this time, he still couldn't focus on studying at all. Suddenly, Rintaro received a call from Wagori. It turned out that she called because of what had happened earlier today. Wagori apologized because Subaru had been a bit rude. Then Wagori invited Rintaro to study together this weekend. However, Wagori was still using honorific language at that moment. So Rintaro felt a little disappointed, because he thought the two of them had already become closer. Unexpectedly, Rintaro then told Wagori that she didn't need to use honorifics when talking to him. But right after saying that, Rintaro immediately regretted it, because he realized he had just said something incredibly embarrassing, which made his face turn red without him even noticing. Finally, the day of their study session arrived, so Rintaro woke up unusually early that morning. He was extremely excited for this day. When Rintaro met Wagori, he was completely stunned by her unique beauty. Then Wagori led Rintaro to her favorite cafe. It was the place she often went to study. When the two of them began to study, while Wagori wasn't paying attention, her face unintentionally moved closer to Rintaro's, causing both of them to suddenly flinch at the same time. But Wagori quickly regained her composure afterward. At that moment, she asked about the reason behind Rintaro's current determination. So he sincerely shared his feelings with her. Because after this important exam, the school would be holding a big sports festival. So if Rintaro failed the exam, he would have to retake it instead of joining the event with everyone else. And Rintaro didn't want to disappoint his friends. That's why he was so determined for this exam. It turned out that Wagori also treasured her friends deeply, especially Subaru, since the two of them had been together since childhood. Wagori knew very well that people often had a bad impression of Subaru. But in truth, Wagori was very kind-hearted. Ever since Subaru was young, she had unpleasant experiences with boys. So gradually, she became the way she is now. After that, their study session came to an end. Of course, Rintaro was very grateful for this. But he was even more surprised, because Wagori had even prepared study materials, along with strategies for handling the exam questions. Since Wagori had something to do, she left first, and Rintaro also got ready to head home. However, he was suddenly stopped by Subaru. It turned out that Subaru had something she wanted to talk to him about. So after a while, The two of them met at a cafe. Suddenly, Rintaro began to feel tense, because Subaru kept completely silent. After that, she finally decided to speak. But Subaru misunderstood, believing that Rintaro and Wagori were dating each other. This left Rintaro completely frozen in shock. He immediately denied the accusation. Although, deep down, Rintaro himself wasn't even sure what exactly his relationship with Wagori was. However, Subaru no longer cared about that. She just wanted Rintaro to stop meeting Wagori. The simple reason was that Rintaro was a student at Chidori Public High School. But Rintaro immediately objected, saying that it had nothing to do with their relationship. It turned out the real reason was even more serious. Subaru was afraid that people would find out about Rintaro and Wagori's closeness. Because the teachers at Kikyo Academy strongly disliked Chidori High School, they even despised it more than the rowdy female students. So if the teachers at Kikyo found out that an honor student like Wagori was associating with a boy from Chidori, terrible things would happen to her. And Subaru truly cherished her friend. So she wouldn't allow Wagori to get into trouble. Ever since they were little, Subaru had always been teased by boys because of her strange hair color. But only Wagori had stood up for her. She even saw beauty in Subaru's unique hair color. That's why Subaru could never forget that moment. The memory of that time was forever engraved in her heart. Therefore, Subaru, at this moment, felt the need to protect everything that Wagori currently had. Because Wagori had worked extremely hard before, and she had struggled a lot just to get into Kikyo Private Academy. So Subaru suddenly begged Rintaro, asking him not to meet Wagori anymore. However, Rintaro couldn't bring himself to do that. Even though he felt guilty, he still couldn't follow Subaru's request. When Rintaro was on the subway heading home, he happened to run into the two girls from the library again. Back then, Rintaro had given up his seat for them, but they hadn't had the chance to thank him yet. So the two girls hurried after Rintaro to do so, although they seemed a little nervous. Because Rintaro's appearance looked a bit intimidating, both girls knew that he was actually a very kind person. As for Rintaro, he still couldn't believe it. He never expected that someone would actually thank him. At that moment, Rintaro suddenly remembered Wagori's image, because she also had the habit of saying thank you even for the smallest things. After several days passed, the results of the midterm exams were finally announced. The teacher began announcing each student's score one by one. Unexpectedly, both Rintaro and Usami had achieved their desired results. Therefore, the two of them would be able to participate in the upcoming sports festival, which made the entire class amazed by their remarkable achievement. Even the teacher was touched by their hard work and determination this time. Suddenly, Rintaro's friends happened to find his notebook. It contained all the study materials that Wagori had prepared earlier, back when the two of them were studying together. Unexpectedly, Rintaro's friends discovered this, so Rintaro had no choice but to tell them the truth about his relationship with Wagori. However, Saku couldn't accept this at all, because neither Saku nor the others knew anything about Wagori. It felt as if Rintaro had betrayed them. Therefore, Wagori could only remain silent. The teacher, seeing the tension rise, told everyone to calm down and keep their distance, because he was also starting to get worried, fearing that someone might do something reckless. When Rintaro returned home, he blamed himself for not explaining things clearly to his friends earlier. However, Rintaro still didn't forget to send a message of thanks to Wagori. When Wagori received the message, she felt just as happy as Rintaro did. But afterward, Rintaro began thinking about Subaru's words, leaving him unsure of what to do next. The next morning, Rintaro and Saku were still in a cold war with each other. This made Usami and Ayato feel extremely awkward in the middle. Even though Usami tried his best to bring them back together, his efforts ended up failing. However, Usami still refused to give up. After school, he and Ayato ambushed Saku from behind. It turned out that they wanted to hear what was really on his mind. Unexpectedly, the reason Saku was angry with Rintaro was because Rintaro hadn't trusted his friends. That was why Saku had been so upset. However, Ayato knew that Rintaro hadn't intentionally kept anything from them. If anyone wanted to know something, they simply had to ask Rintaro directly. That had always been part of his personality. After hearing Ayato's words, the anger inside Saku gradually began to fade. As for Rintaro, his mood at that time was far from good. Even Kyoko noticed it. Although she tried to ask how he was doing, Rintaro refused to share his thoughts. Just then, Wagori came to the shop to buy some pastries. But Rintaro wanted to avoid her. Unexpectedly, his attempt to escape failed, because Kyoko decided to pull Rintaro up to his feet, which only made Rintaro feel even more embarrassed. After that, Kyoko left, so that the two of them could talk privately. Suddenly, Wagori reached out her hand toward Rintaro for a high five. It turned out she wanted to congratulate him, because Rintaro had finally earned the chance to join the sports festival. So Rintaro slowly touched her hand, but his expression seemed a bit gloomy. Even Wagori noticed it. Therefore, she immediately tried to comfort Rintaro. Unexpectedly, Wagori's words came out hesitant and awkward, which made Rintaro burst into laughter, because of how cute and innocent Wagori was. Unexpectedly, Rintaro's once gloomy heart lit up, even if just for a brief moment. Indeed, Wagori possessed a very special kind of energy. Even someone with a scary appearance like Rintaro could finally begin to change because of her. As for Wagori, her heart was beating uncontrollably, since it was the first time she had ever seen Rintaro smile so much. When night fell, Rintaro's family gathered for dinner. He was surprised to see such a luxurious meal that night. It turned out that his mother had prepared it specially. After learning about Rintaro's exam results, this made Kyoko extremely happy. Although Rintaro's score this time wasn't very high, Kyoko knew that he had truly given his best effort. The way he looked now was completely different from how he used to be. Even though Kyoko didn't know what exactly motivated him, deep down, she already felt very proud and satisfied. Meanwhile, Subaru was meeting with Wagori. It turned out that the reason she asked Wagori out was because of Rintaro. Since Subaru had seen Wagori and Rintaro together at the cafe earlier. However, that had only been a coincidence. When they left the cafe, Subaru later stopped Rintaro to talk with him. Now, Subaru was being honest with Wagori. She admitted that she had asked Rintaro not to see Wagori anymore. Unexpectedly, Subaru apologized to her for acting on her own without thinking. Wagori was taken aback, yet she smiled softly, because Subaru's sudden apology had surprised her. At this moment, Wagori partly understood just how serious the bad relationship between Chidori and Kikyo really was. Wagori began to blame herself for what had happened. Realizing that Subaru's actions had all been for her sake, she fully understood that now. Unexpectedly, Wagori realized how deeply afraid Subaru truly was. Subaru knew that she herself had been selfish. Ever since that conversation she had with Rintaro, she had always been afraid that Wagori would find out the truth. And what was even more terrifying was that Rintaro hadn't told Wagori anything. This made the rust in Subaru's heart spread even further. Subaru's guilt had grown so heavy that even breathing felt painful for her. So Subaru decided to call Wagori out to finally face it. Unexpectedly, Wagori didn't blame Subaru at all. Because of that, Subaru let out a deep sigh of relief from the bottom of her heart. However, Subaru was still the same person. She was still that timid girl. That's why Subaru now deeply hated herself. She thought that her recent actions had only been bothering and troubling Wagori. However, Wagori gently took Subaru's hand just in time. Wagori was still as cheerful as ever. She started doing the same little things that they used to do when they were still children. Because Wagori wanted Subaru to know that she had always been a kind person. Even if it was just small, ordinary things, those small things were what truly mattered. Since long ago, they had always been together. And Wagori had always been cherished by Subaru. That's why Wagori pleaded with her, begging Subaru not to keep hurting herself anymore. And above all, not to deny the Subaru that Wagori so dearly loved. Wagori believed in the things she could see with her own eyes. At that moment, she didn't forget to tell Subaru, "I love you so much, Subaru." As for Subaru, she slowly walked toward Wagori and gave her the warmest hug. Because now Subaru finally understood what she needed to do. At the same time, she also regretted her past actions. She realized that she should have asked for Wagori's opinion first. Unexpectedly, Wagori sincerely shared her feelings as well. She said that she really wanted to meet Rintaro. Because now, Wagori had truly fallen for him. So Subaru decided to tell her the truth. When she had talked with Rintaro, he had said something similar to what Wagori just said. And Rintaro's words were these: "I'm sorry. But I can't." With that, all of Subaru's inner conflicts finally came to an end. After that, the two of them walked home together. Although Subaru felt guilty for bothering Wagori at this late hour, Wagori said she didn't mind at all. Suddenly, she received a message from Rintaro. On Rintaro's side, he was extremely nervous, because he had just sent a message to Wagori. Even though Rintaro still didn't have much courage, unexpectedly, he received a call from Wagori. It turned out that Rintaro wanted Subaru's contact information, but he had no other way than to ask Wagori for it. Because Rintaro wanted to talk to Subaru directly. Coincidentally, Subaru was also at Wagori's place at that moment. So Rintaro arranged to meet Subaru the next afternoon to talk. The reason Rintaro wanted to meet Subaru was because he wanted to know how he could get Subaru's permission to see Wagori again. During their last meeting, Rintaro realized that words alone weren't enough. And he completely understood Subaru's feelings. Because the relationship between the two schools was terribly bad. Staying uninvolved was the best option for both sides. But Rintaro simply couldn't do what Subaru had begged him to do. Because Wagori was truly a special girl. She was the one who made Rintaro realize his own worth. That's why he wanted to continue seeing Wagori. However, Rintaro still couldn't bear the thought of bothering her. So he wanted to ask Subaru how he could meet Wagori without causing any trouble to her. Unexpectedly, Subaru told him that he didn't need to ask her about such a thing. Because it had only been Subaru's own decision all along. However, Rintaro truly wanted to hear her opinion. Because he couldn't ignore the words of someone whom Wagori deeply cherished. This made Subaru extremely surprised. It was true that Rintaro was genuinely a very kind person. Even Subaru had to admit that. The next day, Rintaro suddenly had a problem. He was constantly distracted and unfocused. Even during sports practice, Rintaro was still the same. So Usami and his friends had no idea what kind of problem Rintaro was actually facing. Therefore, Usami began planning to find out what was going on. It turned out that he and his friends decided to follow Rintaro secretly. At that moment, Usami was also wondering when Saku would finally stop being mad at Rintaro. After all, Saku had said some pretty harsh things before. It seemed that Rintaro was still upset because of that. Unexpectedly, when they followed him, Wagori's group appeared as well. That surprised Rintaro's friends a lot. It turned out that Rintaro had arranged to meet Wagori and Subaru this time to talk. However, he apologized to both of them for constantly calling them out just to talk. But Wagori didn't mind that at all. In fact, she felt very happy to see Rintaro so many times like this. Suddenly, Wagori became shy and embarrassed after she honestly told Rintaro that truth. Meanwhile, Usami was standing right next to them. At that moment, he became extremely angry out of jealousy. Because Rintaro had the chance to get close to those girls. Usami genuinely wanted to experience what Rintaro was feeling. However, he spoke a little too loudly, which made Saku panic in fear of being discovered. Meanwhile, on Rintaro's side, he brought up the topic of his friends when talking to Subaru and Wagori. It turned out Rintaro wanted to ask for their opinions, so he could tell his friends about everything that had happened recently. Because Rintaro truly didn't want to hide anything from his friends. They were the few people who had ever been close to him. Since he was little, no one ever wanted to be around Rintaro. But ever since he entered Chidori High, his current friends had always stayed by his side. Although Rintaro wasn't used to it at first. Gradually he realized Thatha really couldn't live without them. No one could ever replace the friends Rintaro had now. Because Rintaro saw the deep bond and trust between Wagori and Subaru. He wanted to have that kind of connection too. That was why Rintaro wanted to share everything with his friends. Even though he was afraid that both Wagori and Subaru might face trouble because of it. Rintaro still begged them to help him this time. Unexpectedly, Wagori readily agreed to his request. And surprisingly, Subaru did too. Both of them deeply admired Rintaro. Because of how much he valued his friends. Even Wagori wanted to become friends with them. Since she trusted the kind of people they were. and Subaru also wanted to meet them in person to apologize, because she had acted a bit rudely toward them before. After that, everyone walked home together. On their way back, a group of unfamiliar people suddenly showed up to cause trouble. It turned out that the leader of the gang had arrived. His subordinates were the ones who had once been scared off by Rintaro. But this time, they came looking for revenge. Realizing that things were about to turn bad, Rintaro told Wagori and Subaru to leave first. However, the gang wasn't about to let them go so easily. One of them suddenly made a comment about Subaru's unique hair color. But to everyone's surprise, Usami appeared out of nowhere. And even Rintaro's other friends showed up as well. It turned out they had come to rescue Rintaro and the girls. Afterwards, Rintaro brought Wagori and Subaru to a safe place. Then he apologized to both of them, because they had been dragged into danger because of him. Meanwhile, Rintaro's friends stayed behind. Astonishingly, Ayato managed to handle all of the gang members by himself. And finally, the day of the school sports festival arrived. Unexpectedly, Rintaro's friends became really upset, because he didn't perform well in this event, even though Rintaro had always been good at sports before. However, he showed no motivation at all this time, since he still hadn't found the chance to talk openly with his friends. Just then, his friends showed up at the field, so Rintaro thanked them for what they did yesterday. But unexpectedly, Usami accidentally revealed something, that they had secretly followed Rintaro the previous day. Rintaro started thinking back, and realized it was true, because when he was in trouble, they appeared right on time. But Usami and Ayato ran off first, leaving Saku alone with Rintaro. So the atmosphere between them became a bit awkward. Then, Saku took the initiative to apologize to Rintaro for saying so many harsh things before. Partly because Saku hadn't understood Rintaro's feelings back then. He should have just asked Rintaro directly. But instead, he chose not to trust him. However, Saku was truly happy now, because of what Rintaro said the previous day. And from that moment, Saku trusted Rintaro from the bottom of his heart. Usami and Ayato felt the same way too. That was exactly what Rintaro admired, the same kind of friendship that Wagori and Subaru shared. So if Rintaro ever has any problems, he can always rely on Saku. Meanwhile, Usami was feeling nervous, because he didn't know how things were going between them. But it seemed that Usami and Ayato no longer needed to worry, since they saw that the bond between Rintaro and Saku had returned. Afterwards, everyone went back to focus on the sports festival match. The crowd was extremely anxious, especially after seeing Rintaro's poor performance earlier. But now, things were different. Rintaro had regained his fighting spirit, so he and his class successfully advanced to the next round. Even Rintaro himself felt genuinely happy, as if he had been reborn once again. However, when it was Usami's turn to compete, he didn't win, so he couldn't stop crying because of it. Usami had been so determined before the festival began, but things didn't go as he had hoped. That's why he felt so disappointed. Suddenly, Rintaro received a message. It turned out that Wagori's group wanted to meet with his friends. So everyone gathered and introduced themselves to one another. Unexpectedly, Wagori was very natural. She confidently blended in with the students from Chidori Public High without hesitation. Even Rintaro was surprised, seeing how quickly they all became close. The reason why both Wagori and Subaru invited everyone here was because they wanted to express their gratitude for what happened yesterday. They even prepared some sweets as gifts for the boys, which completely surprised Ayato when he received them. Even Usami burst into tears, touched by the kindness of Wagori and Subaru. And that was certainly something Usami had never seen before. After that, Subaru sincerely apologized to everyone for the harsh words she had said back in the library. She admitted that she once viewed Rintaro's friends as enemies, simply because they were students from Chidori High School. So this time, Subaru earnestly offered her apology to them. Unexpectedly, Saku also apologized to Subaru, because at that moment, he too had said some terrible things. The atmosphere among everyone became cheerful again, as both sides truly resolved their conflicts. Their relationships even grew stronger than before. At that point, Subaru couldn't understand anymore why she had ever hated them so much in the first place. Just as Wagori had said, if you don't take a closer look yourself, you'll never truly understand anything. A few days later, Rintaro had another appointment with Wagori. However, this time he was incredibly nervous, because their previous meeting had been purely for study purposes. But today, Rintaro was worried that this might actually be a date like couples usually have. When Rintaro got off the train, Wagori also stepped out right behind him. It turned out that they had been on the same train all along. At that moment, Wagori thanked him for agreeing to meet with her today. She said she had really been looking forward to this. Then the two of them arrived at the aquarium. Wagori was extremely excited by its beauty. She had even prepared a full schedule for the entire day. It seemed that Wagori truly enjoyed this outing. Rintaro could even feel it through the sparkle in her eyes. Later, the two of them sat down to eat together. Rintaro sincerely thanked Wagori for everything she had done recently. Wagori happily accepted his words. She even asked how Rintaro felt about the sports festival. He admitted that he was really happy about it. It had truly been a great opportunity for everyone, because it helped Rintaro and his friends understand each other better. After that, Rintaro excused himself to go to the restroom, while Wagori stayed outside looking through the pictures they had just taken. It turned out that Rintaro went to the restroom simply because he couldn't handle how cute Wagori looked out there. So he went in just to calm himself down. He couldn't quite understand his own feelings at that moment. However, the dolphin show was about to begin, so Rintaro quickly headed back outside. Suddenly, he saw Wagori standing with a little girl. It seemed that the girl had gotten separated from her parents, so Wagori wanted to help her find them. She decided to go search for them herself, while Rintaro stayed behind to keep the girl company. The two of them then sat down together. The adorable little girl felt sorry for troubling the two of them, but Rintaro didn't mind it at all. Unexpectedly, the girl assumed that they were a couple on a date. Rintaro was taken aback by this misunderstanding, yet he didn't deny having that kind of relationship with Wagori. Soon after, Wagori returned with the girl's parents. The two parents immediately hugged their daughter tightly. Before the family left, the little girl whispered softly into Rintaro's ear. She said that Rintaro and Wagori really looked perfect together. Those words left Rintaro a bit stunned. After that, the two of them went to watch the dolphin show. It turned out that this was what Wagori had been most looking forward to, because up until now, she had only ever seen it on TV. Being able to witness it in person made Wagori feel completely satisfied. Today, Wagori was truly happy. Meanwhile, Rintaro was still in shock from everything that had just happened, because he had never imagined that he would one day have such feelings for someone. And especially, that person turned out to be Wagori. Rintaro had never dared to even dream about something like this. Perhaps now, Rintaro finally understood these emotions, and he was certain that he could no longer ignore them. The next morning, even though Usami had just arrived at school, he already looked extremely unmotivated because of the gloomy weather. Unexpectedly, Rintaro felt the same way. In fact, his expression looked even darker than usual. Even Rintaro's friends could tell something was off. The truth was, Rintaro couldn't stop thinking about Wagori. It was as if he was going crazy, because her image kept flashing through his mind. Rintaro couldn't help but wonder what she might be doing right now. His emotions were all tangled up, confused by his own feelings. A moment later, Usami suddenly called out Rintaro's name, which startled him a little. It turned out Usami wanted to visit Rintaro's house together with their friends. Although Rintaro hesitated at first, he eventually agreed. To everyone's surprise, when they arrived, they were all shocked and delighted to find out that Rintaro's home was actually a bakery. It was completely different from what they had imagined. Soon after, Kyoko appeared. Unexpectedly, Saku was very thoughtful and even brought a gift for her. This made Kyoko very happy, because it was the first time Rintaro had ever brought a friend home. So she was extremely excited. Unexpectedly, both Wagori and Subaru also came along. Rintaro was immediately startled by this. Fortunately, everyone got along well with each other. However, when Rintaro faced Wagori directly, he instantly turned red, but Kyoko seemed to understand something from Rintaro's shy reaction. As for Wagori, she asked Subaru about her own appearance, because Wagori felt it might not be suitable for being at Rintaro's house. However, Subaru thought Wagori was still as cute as ever. After that, Kyoko prepared a luxurious feast. Even Rintaro was very surprised by this. But Kyoko soon had to return to the bakery. At that moment, Usami had something curious to ask Rintaro. It turned out he wanted to know when Rintaro started dyeing his hair. And even when he began wearing earrings. Because earlier, Usami had seen a childhood photo of Rintaro. His hair was still naturally black back then. Unexpectedly, Rintaro had dyed it a long time ago. And his reason for doing so was quite silly. Even Wagori was very curious about it. So Rintaro slowly revealed the reason. It turned out that he had always admired people with blonde hair and piercings. Therefore, to Rintaro, that was just a silly reason. However, it was actually a very significant story. Back in elementary school, Rintaro didn't have any friends. So studying was never something he enjoyed. One time, Rintaro's parents took him to a famous bakery nearby. Unexpectedly, the taste of the pastries there stayed in his memory ever since. Then he happened to glance toward the kitchen. Rintaro saw a baker with an incredibly cheerful expression. So he felt deeply envious. Because Rintaro also wanted to laugh and smile like that person. That's why he wanted to look like the baker he admired. On the way home, Rintaro suddenly told his parents about what he had just seen. However, after Rintaro started doing what he liked, none of his classmates dared to come close to him anymore. Because of his eccentric appearance. Unexpectedly, Kyoko heard everything from behind. So she remembered the things that happened in the past. At that time, Rintaro wanted to give up. Because he couldn't make friends like everyone else. Rintaro truly wanted to give up on everything. But it wasn't until everyone brought him to that famous bakery that Rintaro finally started to feel happy again. He even began to talk about the things he really wanted to do. Kyoko was certain that Rintaro had used all his courage before he could do something like that. Returning to the present, Kyoko appeared, bringing pastries for everyone. After that, she quickly headed back to take care of the shop. Unexpectedly, before she left, Rintaro thanked Kyoko, which deeply touched and surprised her. Several days later, everyone gathered together once again. Ayato and Saku burst into laughter. After seeing how close Wagori and Rintaro had become, it turned out that this time, everyone gathered to study together. Because their final exams were approaching, so Rintaro was now completely focused. However, this time he wanted to study alone. Because Rintaro felt guilty whenever he bothered Wagori. Even though he was truly grateful for her help. Still, Rintaro didn't want to rely on others anymore. He felt that things wouldn't be right if everything kept going on like that. But whenever Rintaro faced difficulties or didn't understand something, he would definitely ask Wagori for help. Fortunately, Wagori understood Rintaro's intentions. She was even happy, because Rintaro could express this by himself. Meanwhile, Usami was completely shocked when he saw Subaru's enormous stack of study materials. As expected, Kikyo Academy was truly on a whole different level compared to Chidori. Because Usami's review booklet was only 1/10 the size of Subaru's. After that, everyone began studying diligently together. At that moment, Rintaro unconsciously looked at Wagori. Her expression was truly adorable. Especially when Wagori was concentrating on something. That very image stayed deeply in Rintaro's mind. As for Subaru, she was struggling with a difficult math problem. Even Usami was stunned after taking a look at it. But unexpectedly, Saku was able to solve it with ease. Everyone was astonished by how smart he was. It turned out that Saku was a natural-born genius. He made Subaru admire him greatly at that moment. However, even though Saku was extremely intelligent, he couldn't teach others properly. Even Rintaro agreed with his friends about this. When Saku realized that, he was very disappointed. He couldn't accept it at all. So Saku grabbed Subaru's book from earlier. It turned out he wanted to prove his teaching skills to everyone. However, both Wagori and Subaru still couldn't understand anything. As a result, Saku got upset this time. He even wanted to go home out of frustration. Finally, the day of the exam results arrived. Usami was overjoyed because he had managed to pass once again. So everyone didn't have to take any retests. Which meant they would definitely have some time to enjoy their summer vacation. A while later, the teacher entered the classroom. He made an announcement to everyone. After the exams were over, the summer vacation would officially begin. However, the teacher didn't remind them to study hard. Instead, he encouraged them to join as many activities as possible during the summer. Because the teacher knew that student life was truly precious, and everyone would soon have only a little time left to experience it. When school was dismissed, everyone gathered together to hang out. On the way, Rintaro's mind was filled with mixed thoughts. He was very happy that the whole class could be this united. Honestly, Rintaro could never have imagined before that he would have such strong desires and determination like this. Because ever since Rintaro met Wagori, everything had completely changed. Suddenly, the group unexpectedly saw some female students from Kikyo Academy. And surprisingly, Wagori and Subaru were among them. When Usami saw this, he tried to wave at the girls. But Saku and Ayato quickly stopped him in time. Because if they hadn't done that, people around them would definitely have become suspicious. Luckily, everything turned out fine. But then, Usami suddenly asked Rintaro an unexpected question. Because he thought that Rintaro was dating Wagori. This made Rintaro startled. He immediately denied it, but Usami knew very well that Rintaro already had feelings for Wagori. Even though he never said it out loud, all of Rintaro's friends could clearly tell. Because lately, his behavior had been obvious as day. Due to this truth, Rintaro couldn't handle it at all. His face kept turning red non-stop. But there was something that worried Rintaro even more. He wondered whether Wagori might have realized it or not. So Rintaro was deeply focused on thinking about it. At the same time, his usual clumsy self had returned. After that, he no longer had the energy to do anything. Because Rintaro was still curious about what dating really felt like. It was something he had never experienced before. Unexpectedly, Rintaro's friends had a serious misunderstanding. They thought he was already dating Wagori. But for Rintaro, just seeing her smile was already more than enough for him. While Rintaro was lost in thought, Ayato suddenly appeared, which startled him. But Rintaro took the chance to ask Ayato about dating. However, Ayato had never experienced it either. So he didn't really know what it was like. Unexpectedly, Ayato found the whole situation quite amusing. Because he finally had a chance to have a heart-to-heart talk with Rintaro. Since the two of them had never done something like that before. And Ayato realized that Rintaro was starting to express his emotions more and more openly. That was definitely a positive change for him. Even when Rintaro talked about his childhood, he no longer tried to hide anything. He now truly trusted his friends. This also made Ayato feel genuinely happy. At that moment, Ayato comforted Rintaro, advising him not to worry too much. Because no matter what conclusion Rintaro came to, his friends would always support him wholeheartedly. Thanks to Ayato, Rintaro finally felt more at ease. After that, the two of them returned to play games with everyone. When Rintaro got home, he felt happy as he looked at the photos of everyone. They had truly spent a wonderful time together. Suddenly, Rintaro imagined going on a vacation with Wagori, which made him feel a little embarrassed. However, Rintaro unexpectedly received a message from Wagori. It turned out to be just a notification about her birthday. So Rintaro started thinking about what gift to give Wagori. However, he couldn't come up with any ideas. Because Rintaro rarely gave presents to anyone, especially to someone of the opposite gender. Therefore, Rintaro had absolutely no experience with this kind of thing. Even though he didn't really know much about Wagori, Rintaro began to feel something inside. It turned out that he wanted to get to know Wagori better. However, Rintaro was suddenly called on by the teacher. Because he was distracted during class. When Rintaro got home, he asked Kyoko about any good bakeries nearby. However, she seemed a bit angry. Because she thought Rintaro was looking for cakes from another shop. But that wasn't the case at all. It turned out that Rintaro wanted to buy a birthday cake for Wagori. Yet this time, he wanted to do something new. However, Rintaro didn't know how to go about it. Unexpectedly, Kyoko came up with an idea. She suggested that Rintaro should bake the cake himself for Wagori. According to her, that would make it much more meaningful. But Rintaro thought it was impossible. Because he had never tried doing it before. As for Rintaro's father, his name was Keiichiro. At that moment, Keiichiro was exhausted after a long day of work. But according to Kyoko, baking had always been his passion. It turned out that Keiichiro had a deep love for pastries. Unexpectedly, Keiichiro's expression looked very similar to Rintaro's. Perhaps it was simply because the two of them were father and son. Unexpectedly, this time Rintaro wanted to ask his father to teach him how to bake, so that he could give the cake to Wagori as a gift. Even though Keiichiro seemed busy, he still agreed to his son's request. This completely surprised Rintaro. After that, Keiichiro asked exactly what kind of cake Rintaro wanted to make. However, Rintaro still hadn't decided on the details yet, but he wanted to put his feelings of gratitude into the cake. Because when Wagori looked straight at him, it made Rintaro feel as if he were being saved. That's why he wanted Wagori to feel happy when she tasted the cake he was about to make. So the two of them went into the kitchen to bring the idea to life. And Rintaro seemed very serious about it. Even Kyoko was surprised when she saw him like that. However, Rintaro's body gradually became exhausted, which made his friends very worried about him. When they found out the reason, everyone was shocked. As for Wagori, her friends surrounded her to invite her out for a celebration, since they knew her birthday was coming next week. However, Subaru suddenly asked everyone to postpone the date, because she had something to do that day. So Subaru wouldn't be able to join the celebration. When Rintaro finally got home, then he suddenly remembered that he still hadn't received an official invitation from Wagori. So Rintaro decided to text her at that moment. After that, he also found out the exact date and time. So Rintaro then began preparing to continue his studies. Meanwhile, Wagori was extremely happy, because she had just gotten the opportunity to hang out with Rintaro on her birthday. Rintaro even revealed the gift he intended to give, making Wagori eagerly look forward to that day. As for Rintaro, he continued with his previous plan. He seemed very focused on this task, and Rintaro was meticulous down to every detail, because his goal was to make a cake that Wagori could enjoy. Unexpectedly, according to Keiichiro, Rintaro seemed to have succeeded, since his cake looked acceptable. But for Rintaro, this was surely a great success, and he was very excited to attend Wagori's birthday. Rintaro also didn't forget to thank Keiichiro before leaving. However, he still felt nervous, because Rintaro worried that the cake he prepared might not suit Wagori's taste. Unexpectedly, both of them arrived early, although it wasn't yet the scheduled time. But now everyone was already present. So Rintaro immediately gave this gift to Wagori. This made her very happy. Wagori even felt more excited when she realized that inside the box was a cake. After that, Wagori led Rintaro to a place full of childhood memories. It turned out to be the place where she and Subaru used to play together. A while later, when the two of them sat down together, Wagori suddenly opened the cake. Unexpectedly, it looked extremely cute. Even Wagori really liked it. However, she was even more surprised when she found out that this cake was made by Rintaro's own hands. According to Rintaro, this was a special occasion for Wagori, because she always bought cakes from his shop. Rintaro had specially prepared this for her, the cake he had been preparing for several days. Rintaro also felt very grateful to Wagori. So the things she had done before, Rintaro wanted to convey through the cake he made with his own hands. Unexpectedly, Wagori seemed to be touched by Rintaro's feelings. She promised that she would eat it very deliciously. Afterwards, the two of them went home. When Wagori got home, she couldn't wait to try the cake that she had made with her own hands. As expected, the flavor was wonderful. As for Rintaro, when he got home, his expression showed nothing at all. Even Kyoko was worried, because she feared that Rintaro might not be able to give the gift. His face at that moment looked very scary. It turned out that he was waiting for a message from Wagori. That was why Rintaro had such an expression. Unexpectedly, Wagori then called him directly. She thanked Rintaro for spending so much time on this, and the cake was truly delicious. This made Rintaro feel extremely relieved to hear. Unexpectedly, the cake Rintaro made gave Wagori a very warm feeling. So Rintaro also felt very warm after hearing this. After that, he informed his parents. Rintaro's previous plan had truly been very successful. He even decided to seriously make cakes during this summer, because Rintaro wanted to improve, so he could create many more wonderful cakes. Finally, the summer break arrived. At this time, Rintaro's friends had gathered together to have fun. Both Wagori and Subaru also appeared to join them. On the way, everyone noticed a cake shop, so they all ran over to take a look. With Usami present, no one had to worry about food. As for Rintaro, he went with Saku to buy drinks. On the way, Rintaro shared Thatha was currently addicted to making cakes. Although it seemed quite tiring, Rintaro still really enjoyed every time he made it. Unexpectedly, Saku also wanted to try his cakes. After that, everyone appeared together again. They went to the beach to have fun together. Surprisingly, Subaru felt very comfortable being there, because she liked watching everyone enjoy themselves. But deep in Subaru's heart, she always had a sense of fear. Every time Subaru went with everyone, she always feared that she might ruin their atmosphere. So Subaru always created an invisible distance between herself and others. At this moment, Wagori seemed to notice the problem. So she directly asked Subaru about what had been troubling her. Unexpectedly, Subaru then went to the boys' group, because she wanted to ask them for a favor. It turned out that Subaru had been looking forward to today. But at the same time, she also felt heavy-hearted. Subaru sincerely apologized when she said these things to the boys. However, Subaru also bravely shared. It turned out that she had been very afraid of boys since childhood, because many things had happened to her when she was young. From then on, she always tried to find ways to stay away. But since Subaru met everyone here, it has changed her perspective. And that was what Subaru had been worried about all along. Thanks to Wagori, she had the opportunity to go along with everyone. Unexpectedly, Saku had long considered Subaru a friend. It turned out that everyone else felt the same way. So Subaru gradually began to blend in with everyone. After that, everyone prepared fireworks together. As for Subaru, one day, she wanted to love herself. Therefore, Subaru decided to make a change, because she wanted to become a warm person like them. After that, everyone shared a precious time together. And Rintaro also had some private time with Wagori. At this moment, she thanked Rintaro for everything. Without him, perhaps Wagori would have nothing in her current life. Even regarding Subaru, thanks to everyone, she was able to make many new friends. However, this surprised Rintaro greatly. Although it was difficult for Subaru to talk about, she was very strong in sharing this with everyone. Even Wagori was very surprised. Because if it were the old Subaru, Wagori didn't think she would have been able to act like this. Ever since Subaru had been afraid of boys, it seemed that she had closed off her heart. But recently, Wagori could sense a change. Subaru's attitude gradually became softer, and that made Wagori very happy. Unexpectedly, Rintaro also had something he wanted to share. The one giving thanks this time was him. Because thanks to Wagori, Rintaro was able to face many things. So he was very grateful to Wagori for this. Although she didn't know what to say, Wagori truly felt very happy inside. And Rintaro felt the same way. The time he spent with Wagori increased little by little. That time was truly meaningful for Rintaro. And it gradually became something important to him. But at the same time, it would have to end. So Rintaro didn't want this to happen. However, he had to accept it. Although it seemed that everything would end. Unexpectedly, Wagori immediately invited Rintaro again. They would go out together like this again. Because the vacation had only just begun. This way, next time, they just needed to have more fun. In this way, everyone could always enjoy being together. Suddenly, at this moment, Rintaro confessed to Wagori. Rintaro said that he really liked her. This made Wagori freeze instantly. Surprisingly, everyone returned at the right moment. So they couldn't continue the conversation anymore. By the time everyone had gone home, Rintaro took the initiative to call Wagori. However, he was still a little shy. But Rintaro didn't forget to repeat what he had said earlier. Even though it made Wagori feel embarrassed, Rintaro immediately apologized. However, it was genuinely his true feeling. Unexpectedly, Rintaro really wanted to meet Wagori and speak to her directly once more. To his surprise, she agreed. After that, Wagori arranged to meet Rintaro at the upcoming summer festival. So both of them were able to be there together. Rintaro still seemed a bit shy in front of Wagori's appearance at that moment. Unexpectedly, her cuteness made Rintaro feel especially nervous. But he couldn't deny it. Rintaro truly loved seeing Wagori smile. Afterwards, they spent some time sitting together. So Rintaro took this opportunity and prepared to confess his feelings to Wagori. "I like you." That was exactly what Rintaro said to Wagori. Although before, Rintaro had thought it was enough to maintain their original friendship. Just seeing Wagori's smile already made Rintaro feel at ease. But in the moment when they were together during the first break, Rintaro suddenly realized that it was truly love. But he always reserved it for Wagori. Although Rintaro seemed selfish, because the relationship between the two schools they attended wasn't good at all. Rintaro couldn't stay like that forever. Because he wanted to date the person he loved. And that person was the one who had given Rintaro courage and strength. Rintaro truly wanted to become that way. Because he wanted to be closer to Wagori. So Rintaro begged her to go out with him. At that moment, Wagori unexpectedly shared that they had met before. In fact, Wagori had even been saved by Rintaro some time ago. And that was the reason why she often visited the bakery. No one else. It was all because of Rintaro. And Wagori still clearly remembered everything. Last winter, when the weather was very cold, Wagori had forgotten to bring an umbrella and a scarf. At that time, she had also experienced many sad events. However, when Wagori stood in front of Rintaro's bakery, she was drawn to the warmth emanating from the shop. So Wagori unconsciously stepped inside. And the person at the counter back then was Rintaro. However, when Wagori ate the pastry, it was so warm that she cried right there. And Rintaro was the one who comforted Wagori, which made her remember it forever. That very thing made Wagori so happy that she was almost overwhelmed. Although it was just a small gesture from Rintaro, Wagori could still feel the special sincerity behind it. Unexpectedly, she had grown to love Rintaro very much. Ever since Wagori met him. And especially every time she visited the bakery. Wagori felt extremely excited, knowing that she would get to see Rintaro. The reason Wagori went to the bakery wasn't just for the food, she also wanted to see Rintaro. So sometimes, Wagori would drop by a few times each month. However, she still couldn't talk to Rintaro directly. Because of this, Wagori felt a little disappointed. But she didn't give up. One day, Wagori went to the bakery as usual. She ate her pastry like normal. But when she reached the last piece, she was suddenly facing Rintaro directly. Since she hadn't expected to see him, Wagori was a little surprised. And feeling too shy, she left immediately afterward. At that moment, Wagori had really felt like giving up. But deep inside, she didn't want things to end that way. So the next day, she took the initiative to go see Rintaro. What happened right after that made Wagori completely distracted. Even studying became difficult at that moment. In class, when Wagori accidentally opened the curtain, she was surprised to see Rintaro right on the other side. But he immediately pulled the curtain back. However, Wagori was truly happy, because Rintaro turned out to be so close to her. And just like that, Wagori's first love began to bloom. Returning to the present, Wagori clearly told Rintaro that neither of them had anything to do with Chidori or Kikyo. It was precisely because of Rintaro that Wagori especially wanted to get to know him better. At that moment, she also thanked Rintaro, because he had bravely expressed his feelings to her. And Wagori certainly wanted to receive Rintaro's support as well. The most surprising thing was Wagori's reply to Rintaro. She truly liked Rintaro too. And Rintaro felt very lucky. Because he had mustered all his courage from the other side of the curtain of the neighboring school. A place Rintaro had never imagined before. Even a world he had thought he would never be involved with in his life. And Wagori even waved energetically at him back then. Thanks to that, Rintaro had the chance to get to know Wagori. That's it for today's video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to support Oni-chan in the upcoming videos. Thank you all for watching. Much love.